started. My name is Carol Peters, and I'm proud to serve as the president and CEO of United Way Next. Oftentimes people ask the question, what is United Way Next? So I'll just briefly share that we are a community of United Way leaders. We are a private 501c3 nonprofit organization separate from United Way Worldwide, and I share that because sometimes people think we are connected, and we are through a partnership. United Way Next is made up of 4 member segments: our retirees who have served at the United Way long term, alumni, people who have left the network and are still working, as well as current staff like many of you who are joining today. We have a huge group of current United Way staff joining us, so thank you, as well as organizations that are local United Ways and state associations. So thank you so much for joining. At the end of our session, we will be sending out a satisfaction survey as well as membership information. We encourage everybody to respond to the survey, and if you're interested, you can join United Way Next individually or under your local United Way. You're always invited. Today is a big day for us. Following Juneteenth, we were intentional about scheduling this diversity, equity, and inclusion roundtable. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to our hostess of today, our United Way Next board member and a member of our Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Access Work Group, Mary E. Tyler.
Thank you so much, Carol. It is a pleasure to serve as your host today for today's roundtable. Hello, everyone. It's great to see so many of you on this call today. And as Carol said, I'm honored to be part of the United Way Next Board of Directors also. Thank you for being part of this journey. As a United Way board, United Way Next board, we have a strong commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. And this session and future sessions represent the work of the DEI work group or committee. These are participatory sessions, so feel free to add anything that resonates with you or a question you may have regarding anything you hear today in the chat. Please help us improve these learning opportunities by sharing your candid feedback so we can continue to provide meaningful content. And to incentivize your feedback, there will be a drawing of one individual who will receive one of the recommended readings. So if you haven't included your name and affiliation in the chat, please do so as well. It is my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Marc Levy, a United Way professional for more than 25 years, and he is also my former boss. Marc is now serving as the executive director for Questa Education Foundation in Fort Wayne, Indiana. But just like many of us in the United Way movement, he's served in a number of communities, including Portland, Oregon, Fort Wayne, Indiana, Dayton, Ohio, Los Angeles, California, and others. So I turn this program and this segment of our time together over to Marc to walk us through the journey of cross-cultural competency.
Well, thank you, Mary, and welcome to everybody. I'd like to tell you that I'm just really glad that you made the time to be with us today. And I want to underscore some of the words that are in this title, because what's important to understand is this: we're really presenting this important word, journey. This is not something that just happens. Many of us have been living our lives and are already on the journey. You've had the experiences of a lifetime that brings you to this point. So when we talk about cross-cultural competence, hopefully it's something that you've thought about, but it's also increasingly a 21st century challenge that we are facing. And even more important is the whole concept that at the tail end of our title, which is honoring differences and discovering commonalities. Because if we're going to work together, it's about understanding we can do more together than we can alone. But the real challenge is, how do we honor those differences? How do we discover those commonalities so we can build that around the strategies and the strength that we have when we work together? So, and as Carol said, that this is following a special day. The good news is we have a federal holiday. The challenge that we need to recognize is that it was the second of a national holiday, and thinking about how long it took for us to be able to get there to really actually celebrate Juneteenth Day, which had been going on in a variety of different communities, maybe some of yours for a lot longer, but to recognize that as a country, we need to be able to celebrate both the kinds of things that we've struggled with and the victories and the progress that we've made. And that's part of what this is really all about, is helping us think about who we are, where we are in a journey related to our understanding others, and the ability for us to be able to reflect on that and determine ways in which we can move forward, not alone, but together with others. And I say that because we all have stories. And as Mary was saying, and I'll share a little more, the experiences we have in different communities is very different. The things that we experience in different families and different organizations is very different. So this is not as much about the what as really talking about the how. How do we go about really understanding and honoring differences and discovering these commonalities and bringing people together to work together differently than they might if they didn't really understand that and didn't have those building blocks to move forward. So before we go any further though, what I'd like to be able to do is start with a video. And so if we can show that, and then we'll kind of get more into the content from that.
I am a refugee, a global citizen, aching for 2 continents, 2 countries, 2 histories, 2 nations, yet abandoned by all. I am a refugee and I shelter humanity. I walked and ran and screamed miles on end to find peace before I could pronounce my own name. I come with too many invisible treasures, often misunderstood, feared by all, banned by politics, never belonging and always longing. I am a refugee and I anchor humanity. A childhood full of humanity's lowest moments. I carry tiny soulless traumas. Time will only harden my flesh. And my survival is a testimony to humanity's depth and compassion. My traumas will teach the greatest lessons on humanity. I am a refugee and I uplift humanity. I am a refugee, a globally homeless, yet my language is an international bridge. My culture is a blanket from the elements of bigotry. My religion is a pillow for my compassion. My history is a lullaby for tales not to be repeated. And my humanity is in the hands of a child, sitting in a refugee camp, still waiting for a chance to find a safe home. I am a refugee and I challenge humanity. I am a refugee, a wandering, colorful, restless, foreign, alien soul that you are taught to fear, banned, and bully. Yet I bring you a slice of the world of my own home, right here in your backyard. I bring you food so intricately spiced it revolutionized your palate. I bring you my vibrant colors, hand-woven with ancient, delicate wisdom that has diversified your close-minded color wheels. I bring you my childs, my precious only childs, to share a history, a future with you. You and I are too stuck together to be this far apart. I am a refugee and I glue humanity. I am a refugee, a stubborn survivor. You see, cruelty tried to break me. Wars tried to erase me. Bigotry tried to silence me. And politics tried to ban me. But still like time I stand. Still like dust I rise. And still like hope I move. And still like love I flourish. I am a refugee and I heal humanity. I am a refugee, a wandering, colorful, restless, foreign, alien soul. Won't you just let me find my humanity right here next to you? I am a refugee.
Find my humanity right next to you. The poem, I cannot be a poet today, but the message that's in this video hopefully resonates with you. And the reason that I hope that is because it's the central part to our understanding the goal and the journey of cross-cultural competence. We are all refugees, unless we happen to be a small percent of those that were indigenous on Turtle Island in the 1600s when Europeans began to come here. And from the indigenous groups, that's what they call this area, Turtle Island. Many of us have a history, and all of us have a history. And I guess the importance of that is to understand your history, your culture, your beliefs, thinking about who you are. When did your family come to what we now call the United States? Where did you come from? What's the culture that they brought with them? As you saw that diversity of culture that she was sharing as the poem was going on, understanding that and the struggles that people have had to be able to be part of our communities, to be part of our country, and understanding that and thinking about it in terms of yourself. So I ask you to think about, where are you? For my example, my grandfather came from Russia. He did not want to serve in the Tsar's army and came here for the freedoms that he felt that he would get. But part of the aspect that I need to understand that I didn't get, when you think of, again, the indigenous populations, they talk about thinking in terms of 7 generations. Do we know our history going back 7 generations? I can tell you I don't. I didn't realize when I was 12 or 13 to ask my grandfather about his mother, about his grandparents, about the linkages that we had going back a couple hundred years, to understand that, let alone to be thinking forward to the implications of the cultures that go forward with that. So as a part of a journey, it's understanding where we fit in that journey and where we are now and where we're trying to go, but also understanding that as we meet other people, it may be as you get to know your significant other, your friends, people in your organization, what is their culture? What is their background? What do they bring to the whole diversity of our history, our culture, and our beliefs, so that we can really begin to get to that point of respecting and honoring those differences in ways that diversity strengthens us. It brings different perspectives. It brings differences that we need to apply to the struggles and challenges that we're having in our communities and our organizations. The same thing in terms of your friends. Looking around, have you had a conversation, or maybe it's time to have some conversations with the people that you work with, just to get to know them at another level and think about that. What's our culture? What's our values? What's the history that we bring to this whole aspect of what we call community? So when we think of that, I'll put in the context that Mary mentioned my background. I was born and raised in Los Angeles. That experience of understanding I share with people, that if you aren't from LA, you probably don't understand that the definition of reality for many people is very different. Because I went to school, and some of the kids that I played with in school, after school, their dad would come and pick them up after school. But I saw their dad get shot and killed on TV. It happened to be a show. What is reality? And getting to understand that when we see things and understand that. The educational system in Los Angeles was very different depending on where you lived. There wasn't an equitable education system. When I went to Oregon, I had to be shocked to see that they had sundown laws posted on signs in Southern Oregon in the 1960s. And people that left Portland, African Americans, would talk to each other and say, the last place you gas up is in Eugene. Don't stop until you get to California. That was the state of Oregon that now is considered a progressive state, but in reality is very urban and rural and very diverse. Same was true in Baltimore, Maryland, when I lived there, Ann Arbor, Detroit, Michigan, all the different places that I worked. We always were struggling to understand and to accept the differences that people have. So it's about understanding that our ability to be able to really look at that importance of our history and our culture and beliefs helps us, is the bottom line for helping us bring that diversity together around some shared common goals. So when we have a celebration like we just did, are we bringing people together? Are we understanding and seeking to understand so that we can work better together, be able to overcome the struggles people have? Just basically being able to afford housing and have food on the table, to be able to know that they have places to go shopping for quality food, that they're not in a desert. So I'd like to kind of go to the next slide. This is a definition of the 21st century for us all to think about when we talk about diversity. Our racial, ethnic background, gender, nationality, sexual orientation, disabilities, generation, faith practices, or all other identity dimensions all come into play as we move through different environments and work, home, in our community. Andre Tapia talks about that in his book. And the reality is that in the 21st century, when we talk about cultural diversity and the cultural capacity to be able to handle that diversity and to be able to seek that commonality, we need to understand that it isn't just about Black or white. It isn't about Hispanic and Asian. Although we really need to understand those different nationalities and the diversity that comes with it. But we have a lot of diversity in this country. And I don't know how many of you could define in your own communities. Who is the majority in your community? You know, when you think in terms of the different groups that people identify with, white males, is that really the majority? When over 50% are female? Is it really looking at the way in which we live together in terms of marriage versus being single in households? Is it about our economic differences that divide us? Is it about generational aspects in terms of ages, so that people that are over 65 are different than people that are under 25? Those differences are all assets, not liabilities. So I'd like to just share a few things as we kind of go forward with that, is understanding and thinking about your own communities and thinking about yourself. Who do you have as your friends? Who do you have as your family? Who do you have as the people that you work with? And do you understand and seek out to understand the differences that come with them? What restaurants do you go to for food, to share in the culture of different foods? You know, what types of musics do you like? And how does that define who you are? I was a part of a group here in Fort Wayne, and they give you assignments of papers to do and then present. My topic was pop culture and in our society and generations. And basically, I thought to myself, I was looking at superheroes and pop culture. And to date myself, I thought it'd be a simple task, because in my mind, there were only 6 or 8 superheroes. There's a course that the Smithsonian has that's 40 hours long that you take on that exact topic. And one of the first things I identified was an article that said the top 100 superheroes. I didn't know that there were over 100 superheroes. So to be able to understand that and to get into it and realize that there's a whole culture of people that live in those worlds. They dress in outfits, they become a superhero or even a villain. And they go to these conferences that now can be 15, 20, 30,000 people in uniform and they act it out. And they watch these 2.5, 3-hour movies that in my mind are 30 minutes of a story and an hour and a half or 2 hours of violence. But the reality is there's strong messages in that. There's a culture there. There's multiple cultures in our communities that we can seek out to better understand. So what I'd like to talk a little bit about is some of the aspects that we need to be thinking about as we're on this journey. And go to the next So when we think of this, the aspects of the journey, it's first of all, as I'm saying, understanding ourselves and our community, better understanding who you are. Yes, you may have a strong religious beliefs, or you may have different values and principles that are very important to you. Understanding where those came from. Did they come from your family? Did they come from your friends? Did they come from your education? Who else has those? What about your community? Are you in a community that has really gone very strong on woke and the fact of what books you can or cannot read? And that's up in terms of what you're up against as far as the discussion that's going on, looking at the fact of being concerned about government, being concerned about organizations, that there's a distrust where there's violence. It's understanding ourselves in our community and who the people are that we work with. Who are we trying to bring together to maybe take action so that we protect our freedoms, we live and survive together, understanding that diversity that we've got. Be open and curious. Oftentimes, and even though I'm talking at you, the reality is what's more important is that we seek to understand more than we try to be understood. You're really seeking out and understanding people, the people that you work with, knowing who they are, what's important in their life, what's not important in their life, what are the things that frighten them, what are the things that excite them, what do we do on the weekends to entertain ourselves, or in the evenings, who really watches which TV shows for news now defines many of the people that we work and live with. So it's being open and curious, it's getting and reading books, and they'll have some at the end that maybe take you into new dimensions and ideas, and don't be frightened by them. One of the books that we have on there that's been attacked is a book called Waking Up White. That book is a really very powerful book in a person sharing her journey as she woke up. And so they've been attacking it for a woke book, but she woke up, she was awakened to understanding that some of the things that she believed were really not based on fact and evidence. They were based on things that she had been told all along, but really weren't accurate to the way in which people were experiencing life. And so she began to understand herself and her community differently. The power in that book for me was that it helped remind me of things in my life that triggered those exact kind of thoughts and feelings and were a part of my journey. That's part of the reason I was excited to be able to get you to think about your own journey here today. And that gets us to really believe and understand that diversity is in fact an asset, not a liability. That it's better that we listen to each other and explore those differences and respect them and try to understand them, seek to understand them, because in fact, that helps us solve more complex problems, come up with better answers to the challenges that we face. And as I said earlier, no group is a majority any longer because of the way in which we are splintered in a variety of different ways that we define ourselves. And that's not bad, but building it back together so we find that commonality, so that we have the common unity that's community that we can go forward. And that commonality and sense of community can be in organizations. It can hopefully be in the geographical areas that we define as a community, but it also can be a nation state or even our understanding that we have common unity on this planet. That's why when we have a health problem, it's a global health problem. Where you go and travel, you're moving things around. We have global health issues. It's not just a local health issue anymore. Our communities are global communities, and people come from a variety of different places. So it's really understanding the broader aspects and seeking to understand that. The next slide, please. So now it's really talking about, okay, so how do we go about this? The how? And I think I've hit this, and that is being respectful of these differences and understanding that, I may have some good answers. Many people would say Mark is arrogant, and that's true. I have an arrogance that comes with me. My wife says that's because I was a well-loved child. And so I kind of believe in myself. But the reality is I also understand that other people have good ideas, and there's many people that have better ideas than mine. So I listen to them because they may be actually a much better idea, or the blending of our two ideas may come up with a third idea that's even better than would have been if either of those ideas were done. But you have to be respectful for those differences that we bring to the table and understand those differences in terms of what we're bringing to the table. And we need to manage our own biases and stereotypes. Again, I'm going to give an example. When I moved to Baltimore to go to graduate school, I was really uncomfortable walking through the streets in the inner city because there would be groups of people who were sitting on the white stoops. And in where I came from in Los Angeles, groups of people were probably gangs. When I worked in East Los Angeles, they were gangs when they had groups of people. So I was uncomfortable. But after I was there and I got my apartment, and it was summer before school started, it was August, it was really hot, and I had no air conditioner, I went down and sat on the white stoops because that was the coolest place to sit. And pretty soon the other people came from the apartments and sat on those white stoops. And then I saw cars driving by looking at us as discerning and concerned as I was when I was looking at people that sat on the white stoops, realizing that I didn't understand my biases and my stereotypes got in the way and were making me see the community different than what was really going on. People sit on the white stoops because it's the coolest place to sit. And then they talk with each other from one white stoops to the other, and it's a part of the community. So we need to understand and incorporate those diverse perspectives, the talents of others, respectfully those differences, and we need to be conscious and strategic in terms of our building what we call cross-cultural competence in our organizations, in ourselves, in our organizations, our communities. It doesn't just happen. It's nice to go to an Italian restaurant. It's nice to go to a Thai restaurant. It's nice to enjoy Chinese food. It's nice to be able to have all those experiences. But the reality is that it's also good to talk with people, to get to know who they are, to understand the differences that people bring to the community when they come here. They may have very different experiences in their world experiences when they came here. They may have different biases that they've been raised with that make them trustful or untrustful of the differences of people. So how do you begin to kind of do that? Is again, recognizing it as a journey and that it's okay to be open. It's okay to be curious. In fact, it's good to be able to explore those differences and understand that diversity is very, very different in the 21st century than it was in the 20th century. And that we are no longer should be just thinking about English as the only language, when in fact language is important, and we have cultures that speak a lot of different languages. And there was a person that I read an article that he wrote several years ago. He talked about the fact that, the reality is we ought to all be thinking about being bilingual, maybe trilingual. Understanding different words help us to be able to understand those differences. And so if somebody's speaking a word or a language that we don't understand, it's okay to be able to try to begin to understand that. Next slide, please. So basically, what I'm really laying out and rushing through that just to kind of get it out, because we'd like to get into your comments and conversation, is that understanding that the kind of transformation that we're talking about, which is more and more people being cross-culturally competent, or at least seeking to be cross-culturally competent, it means that we need to be intentional about it. It's not just on the back step. It's not just on the counter that we might have or a little note that's on our table. It's really about being intentional. It means reading things. It means doing things like coming to this kind of a session, but it means being able to talk with people, explore with people, go to places that people hang out, go to a pool hall and hang out at a pool hall and have some conversations with some people you might not normally meet and get to know them. Go and be able to be intentional about beginning to broaden out your experiences and your understanding of your community. Why do people think the way they think? What's really behind those thoughts? And is it really fear? Is it disrespect? try to understand that so you can begin to be able to work with that. Again, how do we help bring people together? If you have staff meetings, do you have an opportunity for people to really share the kinds of things they need to share so that people get to know each other? Understand that this is not just a top-down kind of approach. It really, in many ways, is being bottom-up as well as top-down. And we often ignore the bottoms-up part of it. So when you think of when, Mary was talking about our committee, the DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's understanding that it's also about a word that we're kicking around more and more, belongingness. How do we engage people so they feel a shared ownership in what we're trying to do when we work together? And that means really the shared ownership of that, and a shared ownership in getting to know each other and to work together each other and being respectful. So it's that shared ownership of the results. It's saying, what are we trying to accomplish? How do we do that together rather than alone? It isn't about being a leader in the traditional way. It's being about somebody who helps to engage people and leading in the sense of creating an environment that people feel good to work together, getting things done together. Okay, final. Next slide. When I was in Wisconsin, I came across an article that was from the Milwaukee United Way, and it just caught my attention because that was an example of exactly what I'm talking about. The United Way, through their volunteers, hosted a homecoming for LGBTQ adults and allies. And the reason behind it in the article was because many people that come through high school in the traditional way, they really never got to go to a homecoming, to be part of a homecoming. So they were bringing people together, and they thought that that was a way to unite people and to be sensitive and to understanding that we all have different experiences and different values that we need to respect. And there's different ways that we can do that. So I just wanted to throw that out as an example because I thought it was great, but I also, it triggered off in my mind wondering how that would play out in other communities, without the dialogue, without the work, without the understanding, so that people felt okay to be able to do something like it. It's okay to be gay or to be a lesbian or to be queer. And it's okay to be able to have a party and celebrate coming together in a way that maybe hasn't ever happened. So then the final part to this is just highlighting some books that you may be familiar with and you may not. The Inclusion Paradox, the Obama Era and the Transformation to Global Diversity by Andrea Tapia. I had the quote from him. It really deals with it, understanding that we are, and many of our communities are global communities. You have diversity there. And again, I'll give the example. When I moved to Sioux City, Iowa, IBP, the beef plant, needed to bring workers and they brought in Hispanics. But the reality was in that community, that caused a lot of stress because the police were not bilingual. The people in the medical care system were not bilingual. So you had 8, 9, and 10-year-olds translating their medical care to their mother or their grandmother to be able to explain what the doctor needed to talk to them about. And in some cases, in very awkward conversations. So it was building up in that community organizations that began to have people who could translate. There were adults that also were able to understand medical terms. But it's about understanding that we're in a transformational time that's global in our communities and in our country. The 6 Stages of Cultural Mastery by Ricardo Gonzalez, he really lays it out in terms of being strategic and intentional about it and recognize it doesn't happen overnight. It's a journey. And you really just need to start to take it on a little bit here and a little bit there and begin to be committed to just be able to continue broadening yourself out. Castes, if you haven't read that, is a great book that really talks about the caste system in many ways in terms of the myths that some of us have, to understand that we have a history in this country that has the origins of discontent she talks about. It's a very powerful book. It's well worth reading. It sometimes takes a slow read rather than a fast read to really kind of understand the history of what's happened in the country. And some of the stories she talks about are starting to get some attention, but the reality is, again, Juneteenth was a part of understanding the history that we have as a country. That not everything we did was perfect. We did a lot of things that were wrong. And that if we can understand those and move forward with that understanding, we are a much better and stronger country. We're much better and stronger communities. The book that we are in the middle of forever, Indigenous Voices of Turtle Island, is Indigenous leadership being interviewed. And again, for me, it was a slow read because I hear the philosophy and understanding, and I need to take a break after each chapter just to kind of process it. But if you haven't been introduced to the Indigenous Voices, very powerful book. And then I mentioned Waking Up White. That was used as basically discussion groups across Wisconsin. Very powerful. They were talking about how powerful. Again, there was an article in the paper that really talked about how they used that to stimulate conversations and increase sensitivity that people had. I hope that this has been a quick overview to kind of get you interested to be a part of this journey. But it's really about that. And I'm hoping that we'll have some questions, maybe people be able to get you also to join in to make some comments. So really would like to talk about, something you learned, and if it made you comfortable or uncomfortable, what is it? How will you incorporate this into your life and into your organizations, in your community? What are the kind of steps that you think that you might be able to take that would continue on the journey? And any questions or issues beyond that you'd just like to have discussed or answered or stimulated to wonder why or what would I do that, and what might be the reaction in my community? Because if you're, depending on where you are, you're facing different challenges as well as different opportunities. So I'd like to turn it over to see if we have some questions yet that anybody has been in the chat room. Come up with some questions that we might want to go into.
Thank you, Mark. I went ahead and added the questions in the chat for people to consider. And I'll turn it over to Mary to kind of help facilitate this and go from there. Thanks for joining, everybody. And thank you again, Mark, for sharing that information.
And thank you so much, Carol. There was a comment from, I think it's Bonnie. Appreciate the reading list. Looking forward to some good reads. Thank you for sharing that. At this time, we'd just like to invite you to talk about what resonated with you, any questions that you have for Mark, or anything that you're going to do different based on what you learned today. And if you don't feel comfortable putting it in the chat, just go ahead and speak up. We've got quite a few people, but jump in there right now as quickly as you can. Let's see, Ashley, thank you so very much. Something I've learned is trying to prioritize understanding others rather than being understood myself. Ashley, can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think I think a lot of the times just trying to get your point across to others, and just the desire to be understood. I think I don't know, I think sometimes I get so caught up in that to where I'm no longer trying to understand where the other person might be coming from, even if I don't agree with any of the hurtful or negativity that they're saying. I think if they're ever going to listen to me and my viewpoints, it's important for there to be understanding on both ends, and for me not to just have that main goal for me to be understood, because there's two people more often than not in those conversations.
Absolutely. It's an opportunity to learn from each other. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to ask Mitch. Mitch, what resonated with you as you were listening to Mark's comments, or even as you looked at the video?
One thing that I was kind of thinking about was the way I think about community groups and how we engage with them. Mark sort of gave the example of going into a pool hall and just seeing what you learn, seeing what you can learn from people. I feel like I tend to lean sort of a really interesting lens to sort of go out into the community and meet people who maybe aren't necessarily part of those more formal organized groups that we might normally engage with.
Thank you so very much. I'm going to ask, let's see, Debbie Wallach. Am I pronouncing your name correctly? If you would chime in, what resonated with you or anything that you'd like to share or lift up? Let's go to Bianca, and then I'll follow up with Karen Mark if you're still there.
Good afternoon. Thank you. I would just say that what Mark started out with of really, looking inward as well and identifying things within ourselves to recognize what perspectives and potential biases and things like that we bring to the table into those conversations and interactions as well. That really resonated with me. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. Karen, how about you?
I think I had a similar thing of Bianca, just really paying attention to our biases and noticing that when it comes up in conversations.
Okay, thank you. Gia, I love your name, so I'm calling on you to lift up something that resonated with you or something you'd like to speak to or ask a question of.
Sure, I like that Mark said, believe diversity is an asset, not a liability. I'm going to pin that and keep that pinned. I really like that framework. And also just to state, managing our own biases, just be conscious of that as we're working and dealing with people, that we do have biases, recognize that we do when we're, dealing with others. That's it's not just them, right? It's us too. We
Sure.
always think it's you, it's her fault. She thinks like this.
That's great. Thank you so very much. Cindy and then Dan. Cindy, are you still with us? How about Dan? Anyone, just jump in.
Let me just ask a question to see responses, because one of the aspects that I think is understood is our communities that are now much more global in their diversity than they may have been in the past. And therefore, the way in which we go after things may need to change based on that. I'm just wondering if anybody has any thoughts about that in your own community in terms of either the struggles that you're having because of that, and or things that you're doing that are trying to address that in dealing with this whole aspect of diversity. Everybody's got silence on.
Hi there, this is Christy Hagee, United Way of Davidson County, Lexington, North Carolina. I hope everyone can hear me. Thank you for hosting this session today. I just wanted to share that I think, especially for smaller United Ways, we have 3 staff members, including myself. Sometimes we get paralyzed in thinking we can't keep up with the big United Ways. We are in a more rural area, so what can we do? And so our staff came up with several ideas to implement over the past few years, and we've been very successful. Just being intentional, like folks have mentioned already. We participated and set up a table at Juneteenth. We participated in the Hispanic Heritage celebration that they hold each year here in our community. So rather than thinking people are going to come to us, we have to go to them. We have to meet them where they are. We are stealing an idea from a United Way in Iredell County. I don't know if they're on the call or not, but they're Statesville, North Carolina. And they've done this for a few years, where they do a community meal each spring at a local high school, and they line the tables up around the track. And it's a free meal. They have around, I think, 900 people that attend. April, our campaign director, went to this a few months ago. And so we're going to try to do that here in Davidson County next spring. And the idea is you have a meal with your neighbors, and it's not people that you already know. You are sat beside people you do not know so that you can have conversations and get to know people, because I think the stereotypes do prevent us from coming together and being united. So that's just my 2 cents.
Well, thank you so much, Christy. I love the idea of having the community meal, and some communities refer to it as the longest table.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Yes.
that is fantastic.
We're
You should update us and send us some pictures after you have it done, so we can share those out with the community.
We would love that. Thank you so much.
Other thoughts or ideas that you want to share with those on the call? You might be doing something such as Christy just indicated that might be helpful for one of the colleagues on this call. Just lift up that example. Mark, there was a point where you talked about just the point of being intentional. And for those of us who are, although we work in a space that deals with individuals and communities, sometimes that's not the most comfortable thing to do for an individual who might be somewhat introvert. What other ideas would you suggest for someone similar to what Christy said, going out, but she's going out as a group?
Well,
I personally would not go to the pool hall. So other ideas or thoughts that anyone might share.
Yeah.
Bonnie will call on you too after Mark shares this thought.
Well, I would just encourage people to think about, and again, if you're in a United Way and you've got a board, do you ever have a conversation where it's not just a motion and an issue, and where you have what it might be called a non-traditional meeting, that you put something on the table that needs to be talked about that gets people talking? I'll give you an example. When I was in Fort Wayne, we had an interest in changing the way in which we were doing financial investing. And the labor folks got concerned and said, we really have some concern. It needs to be socially responsible investing, because we don't want money going towards jobs that are companies that are going to move the jobs out of our community and out of the country. And so the norm was, anytime people disagreed, it would get tabled. And if it got tabled, that meant it would never come back up on the agenda. So instead, we did the exact opposite. And we said, okay, from now on, every about third or fourth meeting, we're going to have a non-traditional meeting with a topic that really is we're uncomfortable with. And we broke everybody up into small groups that were diverse in themselves. So in that case, for the investment, labor and management and all the different folks were in small groups, and they discussed it, and they came up addressing the issue of socially responsible investing. And it was amazing what they came up with was very different than what originally was being discussed. And the proposal then went to the finance committee, and they worked it out with their investors, and it brought the entire board together around that topic. Similar thing happened, which is how we got a task force to undo racism, was it started off as a conversation that polarized. But instead, once people started talking about it and beginning to understand what we could do in a positive way, it changed the whole direction. And we ended up with a council that created a task force to racism. And in that regard, ultimately, 6 years later, we got the National Award from the United Way of America for our work in diversity. It was because, and we brought the community together. We had racial dialogue groups and boards that had diversity plans and all kinds of things that were going on. And we had counter marches, to the Klan in the area, and all kinds of things that were happening in educational sessions. So I think there's power by thinking about ways you bring people together to talk about something they may not want to talk about, but you find how to frame it in a way that they might want to talk about it, because there's no wrong answer. It's about, let's find out what seems to make the most sense for us to do, given that we don't think there's a right answer yet. but let's talk to each other and figure it out. So I would say it's, you know, if you got a group, you think about it. I love the idea of a small United Way. You come up with something that makes sense for what you're doing. It doesn't mean it's going to look like what Atlanta does it. It's not going to look like it's somebody else because your community is different.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mark.
What do other people think? What have you been doing? How do you get people to talk? Oh, quiet.
So if someone has a thought about that question, we'll come back to you. I want to go to Bonnie. Bonnie, you had your hand up. What comment you want to share or question you'd like to raise?
Thank you. So one of the things that we did here in Hunterdon is to try and kind of push the conversation around intentionality was within our Partnership for Health coalition that we have. We do have a community hospital that's required to have a community health improvement plan. So the local United Way in Hunterdon did go ahead and this is now its 4th or 5th report for a Latino behavior risk factor surveillance system. So 20 years of data of sort of tracking the health and well-beings of our Latinos and then comparing it to county data overall, where we have the reputation of being the healthiest county in the state. That's really good. But then when you look at drill down to the disparities, that gives you data that can then, when we work in the smaller groups that we have, to really say, okay, how do we incorporate the disparity into the work we're doing? I think United Ways particularly are very good at being inclusive. You know, we help everybody, but do we do it necessarily in an equitable manner? So a dashboard was sort of devised to sort of ask ourselves those questions that really sort of test the activities that we're doing to say, are they really having an impact? Are they really addressing equity? So I really like the direction it's going in. Clearly, it opens up a lot of conversations and dialogues that sometimes get a little sticky, but they're conversations that need to happen. So I just wanted to share that. And again,
Wow.
It's a smaller, mid-sized United Way. It's not a huge United Way that sort of took that lead.
That's fantastic, Bonnie. Can you repeat your community again?
So I recently retired from the United Way of Hunterdon County, but it was the last project that I worked on prior to my retirement.
And what community?
Hunterdon County in New Jersey.
Thank you. Thank you. Fantastic. Anyone have a final comment they'd like to share, because it's coming to the hour that we promised you this time to have this conversation, and it's coming to an end. One last comment. Is there anything, Kenya, you would like to share? Megan, anything you would like to share? Jarrett, anything you would like to share? I'm gonna tell you, like they say in church, you have to talk back to me. Anything you would like to share, Kenya?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I liked Mark's story about when he moved to Boston, and just saying how you see people sitting on the steps, on the stoops, and the preconception you had about them. And then later you end up finding yourself sitting on the stoops and realizing that we really aren't that different. So I really like the personal stories about that.
Thank you so very much. Megan, I'll go to you, and Jared, I'll let you have the final word if you have something to share.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, I can hear Jared talking in the office, but you can't hear him on here. So he might have gotten off the hook. But it's my kind of thought whenever we were talking is I, was lucky enough to grow up in a very diverse area. And when I moved here, a lot of the rural communities are not diverse. So just being able to understand that people are coming from all different areas, all different backgrounds, and learning from everyone.
Thank you so much, Megan. All right, Jared, I see your lips moving, but we're not hearing you. All right. Thank you. We know it was fantastic, Jared. This concludes our official time with you, but we have set aside about 15 minutes. If anyone wants to continue this conversation, to ask any questions of Marc or any of the colleagues who will be on the question, but we want to invite you to look out for the next session that will be in October. The announcement will be coming in another week or so. We thank you so very much for participating today. Those of you who weighed in either through chat or had some comments to share, please complete the survey that you will receive after this session ends. And as I said at the beginning of the session, we'll select one random name or individual who will receive one of the recommended books that Marc had on the last slide. Thank you so much for providing an opportunity for us to share this content. We're excited about the response we've been receiving from individuals like yourselves. And again, have a fantastic day. And anyone who wants to stay on after this call for 15 minutes or so, we would invite you to do that. Thank you all again, and continue this journey with others in your communities, family, friends, colleagues, so that we can expand our knowledge of one another's culture, backgrounds, values, and beliefs.
And I do want to make sure people know in the future, you're welcome to bring board members and others who may be working on diversity, equity, and inclusion and access within your local United Way. Christy asked that question, but it came to me, not to the whole group. So I wanted to make sure I mentioned that to all of you. Thanks to Mary and Marc for leading our session today, and to everybody who's a part of United Way Next Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Access Work Group that's helping us advance this work, as well as Procter & Gamble for their support of these learning sessions. We look forward to seeing you all. And again, we're going to stay on for another 15 minutes if you'd like to continue the conversation. A special thanks to Caitlin Guest, who's our master behind the scenes with the technology, the slides, and helping prepare for the learning session. So it was a great session. And I really appreciate everybody's willingness to share so openly.